What a satisfying, enjoyable score, Gerrit. I really, really love that. It just has so many great ideas, and I think I can guide you on quite a bit of practical scoring. There are some things that you ask for in which you would get the effect that you need, but you're asking the instrument to do something uncomfortable, or you're giving them instructions that they don't need, or there are ways of maximizing things that you haven't thought about. Okay, so it's it's just a little bit before 6 in the morning here in New Zealand. I'm getting ready to evaluate a handful of scores from the new dotted semi-brev level, and really looking forward to it. I think I've got about 17 scores, or anyways, it's a bit of scores, but I'm just really enjoying this whole process, and it's so much fun to look at these scores. It just brings a smile to my face when I look at the imagination and the effort and sincerity that each score is getting from their particular entrant. So, without further ado, let's just jump straight into this one, and let's talk about the harp. I've kind of started these evaluations off recently by just talking about the practicality of the harp scoring, and I think I'm going to have to clarify some things in another round of 12 common scoring errors. Not that things are always necessarily erratic, or bad or wrong. It's just that there are better ways ways that are more comfortable and more idiomatic to the musician, and more the kind of things that don't get raised hands at rehearsal. Okay, so the harp part works great here, and it would actually work pretty good here. I would say leave out the grace notes; they're kind of not doing anything, but just have a big roll, right? And I would say instead of la, sol, and so on, I would go to an alphabetic kind of like G sharp instead of sol sharp. It's just more universal today. And you can also use the harp pedal diagram, which you should use at the beginning of the glissando. So like right here, you've written out all of the notes. But there's actually a harp glissando plugin that you can get from Sibelius.com. So I'm going to select this note and this note. All right, and then turn on that. Yeah, like I said, it's been a while since I used it. All right, so harp glissando settings. So you would just add the sharp or the flat after each of these alphabetic letters. So if you wanted to C sharp, you would just type the pound sign like that. And then you'll get the playback. And then you can get rid of all of these written in notes. So you do not need to write in the notes. You just need to have a starting note. In this case, I would say a half note on F, and then a glissando line, and then a destination note. So that's what the harpist needs to read, right? They don't really want to read all of the little notes because that's a lot, and this looks like a scale, not like a glissando, right? So the other thing too is with a glissando, the more notes you have in your glissando, the more strings are being played over the duration of fewer beats, and that makes the glissando more audible and more exciting. So you want to go all the way up to this E here, and that is nearly 3 octaves. 3 octaves in 2 beats is really not that far. You could start from F an octave below, or even 2 octaves below, and you get a beautiful big sweep. Now, I understand if you want to limit it, just because like the music is rising and you might not want the sound of the lower strings. that's understandable too. But I would still say, if that's the case, then just make it shorter. Just start on the third beat instead of the second beat and start from that same F. But once again, like big rolls, lots of notes in the chords is better if you are playing against louder music. And there's no reason why you couldn't drop down. Like if you really want the harp to have a strong roll here, then I would say fortissimo on the harp, forte on everybody else, and mezzo forte on your brass right in here. And then you would get a really nice balance with the big harp rolls, very audible. So, that's my thoughts on harp. And then at the beginning here, this will just not be audible at all. There's no way that the harp can compete with the other elements that are going on here. It just will not contribute to the sound. And this one isolated B will be completely overwhelmed by the second violin. All right, so now let's evaluate the scoring of this page, of this screen. So there is a concern about the pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, and you broaden the scope, but you do keep things high, but you justify it. I really like the way that the colors really work well, and they bear repeating. Okay, one problem that you're going to run into is scoring this high B here, which is completely playable by first flute, by the way. It's not a problem. Notice that Sibelius marks it red, saying this isn't the red of out of range, but it is the red of are you sure you want to do that? And the reason why is just that it's just a bit shrieky up there, right? So piccolo can play that same B for the piccolo. It's just the first B above the staff, and it's a very comfortable, very clear, in control note. Whereas for the first flute player, it's a bit of a pain to play. It's not hard or anything, but it's just it's just a note that doesn't want doesn't have the same kind of fluidity and simplicity to it as a lower note in terms of like articulation and control, intonation, blah blah blah. It sort of wants to shout out. Now, of course, you've got a big fortissimo beginning here, so that's fine, but it'll tend to really it'll tend to have a real edge up there. So just a question of whether or not you want that first flute right at the top. And also, I'm saying fortissimo, but like a lot of times, like the high notes of the flute don't necessarily shriek with the same power as the high notes of the piccolo, right? They, in fact, if you get up to like D and E and so on, the very highest possible notes, then you can end up with notes that start to sort of swallow themselves rather than necessarily shriek. So, anyways, just things to think about. All right. So, I mean, in a more ideal register, it would be better for the piccolo to take care of this and then put your first and second flute on the same B. I think it just would be a more comfortable thing for everybody. Now, here you got A2 oboes, and you got a solo trumpet. So you're balancing things. You're saying forte to fortissimo, right? But the trumpet will still have a tendency to overwhelm the oboes in there. It'll be very, very strong major third sitting right in the middle of the chord. And here you got B octaves in your violins and everything. I think that's all fine. To have a really beautifully balanced, B octaves here. You could have your second violins playing the octave, and have the violas on the lower B and the first violins on the upper B. That's one way of getting a very solid, balanced sound, rather than the lower note being kind of softer and more difficult to hear. But see, here you've got you've got the clarinet sitting on that lower B, so that compensates, but it'll be more of a clarinet sound. Do you see what I mean? It's not. It's going to be less of a balance, more of a wind-dominated low B. Okay, so the next criterion for this for the website evaluations for this page, for this screen, is whether or not there's enough variation in the first four bars and then bars 9 through 12, right? And here it's fairly it's fairly evident that you copy pasted, except for like a couple little touches, like the first beat of this measure in your trumpets and so on. So will that sound repetitive? Because after all, it's not just two parts being played twice. It's four little phrase groups of 2 bars each, right? It's 4 little gestures. So yeah, so that's just something you have to answer for yourself, I would say. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and judge for taste, whether or not that's the right thing to do. But it was something that I tried to avoid, or I tried to sort of magnify the second time around in my score to make to bring in something new. So I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to change anything in what you've scored for the parts that are scored, but you could add more, right? You could be like in my case, I added some timpani and lower brass and so on. But I mean, it's scored very nicely, so there's really not a huge concern. Now, melodic development soaring quite high. Accompaniment figures covering a wide range. That's our next. Those are our next concerns. And here, I like this, with the piccolo. But did you notice this really kind of loses energy when the first violins drop out? So what you could do here is you could continue on with this gesture, scored in the violins, and just have them drop down for 4 notes or so, right? So they could, like, instead of playing this A, they could play the A below. They could play A, D, C, A in the lower octave, and then just jump up to F and D on the way down. And then you would get the illusion that the violins had continued to play. And those same notes the same lower octave could be covered by the violas. I would say I wouldn't want to push the violas all the way up to that high D. I think it's just a little screechy up there to be played on the A string and so on. So I would do the same thing, kind of dropping down on some of the notes. And then clarinets, oboes coming in right there at the end. It's pretty solid what you're having the players do. So that's all the more reason why there should be violins and violas continuing on in some way. Now here, you're racing to the top here with your piccolo scoring, and that's fine. That's exactly right. Now with this, once again, you could have dropped down an octave, right? You could have actually had, like here you've got the violins going upwards in octaves, right? So I would say, I don't know if I would push the first violins all the way up to that high E. Maybe at around A, drop down an octave, and then, be at the same pitch right here. So it would be like this, is what it would look like. Like this, right? So you could just have the first violins jump down, and so that they don't have to play the very, very screechy top notes, right? And then have your flute do the same thing. Just have the flutes drop down and support this. And I would say also, you would want your second violins to also be supported by some wind doubling. I think that it's just a little naked just to have A2 flutes and then joined by piccolo and so on dropping out. Just on like you start off, I completely see the rationale, because you're starting off with just the first violins, right? But then here you add the octave, but it's just not enough. I think when you add the octave here, you need to add the octave, say, in clarinet or something like that. Or oboe. Oboe can easily go up to that high E, right? So it's just things to think about. All right, now, another concern is, like I was just mentioning, the accompaniment figures covering a wide range. And the second violin is perfect for that. Now here you're marking like open strings, and you don't need to do that because in pizzicato, the player will just have a natural tendency to play the open string, right? Because it's the most resonant. Right in here, like you didn't need to mark open A, open D, open A. That's all just pretty obvious to the string player. So I would say just get rid of those because they almost look like harmonics. I try to distinguish between the circle of the harmonics and the letter O for open, right? So sometimes I'll use the text O to distinguish between a harmonic and an open string. But it's all unnecessary. This is nice though. Like I like the pizzicato. This is kind of strange. You're saying pizzicato, and then you have the same note in the other part of your divisi cellos. So you should, if you really intend, see, it's because it's like not clear. So pizzicato here and what's going on here. It's not enough to mark one part pizzicato, and you might think, well, this is arco, but it's not because I can see here is where arco comes in. So you have to mark pizzicato on both of your divisi parts. Treat them like completely different staves because the players will just be looking at whichever staff they need to look at, and they won't be looking holistically at both parts. Generally speaking, they'll just be figuring. They'll be saying, well, I'm the inside player, so I'll play the lower divisi staff, and they'll just look at it and they'll start playing arco. And then you have more raised hands at rehearsals, right? You'll have the composer saying, "Wait a second, cellos, do you have a pizzicato?" And the divisi players will say no, right? So just watch out for that. And then here you say divisi. I'm not sure what you mean. You're saying divisi, but there's only a single. There's only a single. This may be. I may have reformatted your part or your score, so that if so, that's my fault, and I apologize. But generally speaking, it's still divisi. We know you don't have to mark it, right? And you don't have any intervals in here, so that's kind of unnecessary. All right, all right. Now continuing on with the concern of the accompaniment style. You're trading off between the parts. It's fine. So I mean, I almost feel like the accompaniment is not all that strong, right, in these parts. Like there could have been some doubling. There could have been more pizzicato parts involved overall. Rather than just like a single instrument playing these things right in here. Maybe there could have been more, like the cellos could have been more involved. And I think this is cool right in here, but and you've got a little touch of brass in there, and that's fine. I just feel like there could be just a little bit more, but I do appreciate that you're trying to have everything be played kind of lightly in here, and that kind of restraint. But then if you are going to exercise that restraint, maybe there could also be a backing off of the dynamics generally, right? So that also adds to the it's just kind of strange. Fortissimo twice, right? There's another dynamic marking. I'm not sure why that was needed. Okay, so now upper middle register continues on in the piano score, but here you're sort of even though you're kind of staying in that upper middle register, you're kind of adding some more textural contrast rather than necessarily lower notes. Hang on, I'm just going to fix something about this score. So try to remember to click the transposition button, and then it's just so much easier to understand if you are a if you're somebody who does a ton of score reading. Okay, so it's one thing I'll just comment about this page before we move on, which we kind of have to. This is going to be a very long evaluation otherwise, is that it's very string focused, right? It just really has the string sound all the way through, and that is something that you know, if you want a more symphonic sound to a score like this, just really involve the strings a lot, and have the other instruments support and comment and so on, but not necessarily dominate. And then and then like if you have things that are more like wind and brass dominated, it can end up feeling more like ballet music or theater music, right? Or movie music, rather than symphonic. Here, G string, what you want to do is write Sol G. That is the standard, and that every people in every language will be able to read that. Now, I would say, like, if I were playing this, I would probably end up there anyways. But go ahead, you can write Sol G there. That's fine. That the whole concept of the driving staccato transitioning smoothly to the next passage, I think that is addressed here. But I don't understand why we need divisi firsts here when we got the seconds doing nothing, right? Why couldn't the why couldn't the second players be taking the lower notes, and then you could have much stronger first violins? After all, you're not asking, you're like, if it's a concern that the first violins would be too strong, that's not that is, with all of these winds in here, you want a strong string section to back it up. So I would say, just put the just put this lower line on the firsts. It kind of does not make any sense, right? And then you can have, you don't need this. If you do that, you don't need this D here, or this D here in the seconds, right? So just get to this point, and then you can go to your unison right in here. But yeah, a really great start. Now let's take a look at the next screen. So this is a very cool page right here, and I mean, it's got some really great ideas, some very cool scoring. About using the term poco forte, it's a little bit nebulous. It can mean different things, like it can mean poco of the forte, right? So you're treating it's almost like treating forte as its own little microcosm, and just pulling back. Some people would say below mezzo forte. Some people would say a little louder than mezzo forte. So it just depends on the context, right? Now, I wrote poco forte in the piano score for the template because that is kind of what the pianists do, right? So like they are going poco of their forte, right? So interpreting that orchestrally, it's kind of not fair that I put that in there, because now, like, it might be scored out of context, right? So I would say mezzo forte would be the way to address this, even if it's not exactly right, all right? So, and if you mean really more like something that's just a little louder than piano, then go with mezzo piano. Now, right here, I would say you could score your oboe part forte dolce. That might be a better way to deal with this. And then just have everybody else back off and be softer, right? I think if everybody was playing piano or mezzo piano, then you would get a good balance. Maybe piano in the lower heavy brass here, and mezzo piano in the strings, and it just gets a better balance. And then this lovely little harp line can come through here, right, without being overwhelmed by the really aggressive pizzicato of the other parts. But you can just pretty much guarantee any time that a trombone player is playing that you're not going to be able to hear the harp, right, in an exposed way. So I mean, it comes through a little bit here in your mock-up, not quite as much there. It's something that you might want to explore. But yeah, I would say, back off on poco forte. Try to figure out if there's a mezzo dynamic you can use, mezzo piano, mezzo forte, something that is more of a background to the melodic statements, right, and the little explorations here, and the transposed or the transcribed left hand parts. So I'm not a total hater of mezzo dynamics. I just sort of try to avoid them for their own sake. Do you know what I mean? They're more of a blending sound than they are necessarily a leading dynamic, right? They're not a and they're being used too much as a default, right? So that's my pet peeve. It's not against any kind of mezzo dynamic scoring ever. So yeah, so if you were like say piano crescendo to mezzo forte, I think that would work really really great in both of these parts. Yeah, and then the same thing here. And that works beautifully with bassoon. It's such a wonderful kind of chuckling kind of a part. I don't think you really need to use A2 bassoons here. I think one is better, like because you're actually setting it quite high. But one bassoon will work fine, and then pizzicato plus this measured tremolo, that all works really 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 great. I like it a lot. And I love these soft trombones below. That's really really nice too, and little blips here. This we're kind of getting into the to our evaluation criteria: contrast of color, breadth of texture, and middle register scoring. You're certainly justifying that. Maintaining differentiated roles and closely spaced melodies and overlapping accompaniment figures, highlighting the inner voices. You're doing that as well. Really, really well done. Keeping the triplets from overwhelming the melodic line above. You're doing that, but I think that the place for doubling should be just start here, not here, right? And I don't know if you need two clarinets. I think one clarinet will be perfectly fine, and then just throw in the second clarinet on the intervals. And then that's a beautiful blend with the violas. I mean, you could have two clarinets, but I don't think it's just really all that necessary. Here you've got some fairly low horn scoring, and you can see that it isn't so much bottom scraping, you know, as before when it was not transposed. So here with the transposed part, you can see it's all really playable. Now, I mean, it's a little dubious. I mean, are they saying that horn players can't play low F sharp? I mean, that's what Sibelius is saying is that like even a note as high as F sharp below written middle C is a problem for amateur horn players. That's something I have not run into. I would say below middle C, or sorry, below C in the bass staff, below written C in the bass staff is where I would, if I were working with a semi-pro or amateur orchestra, I would watch out about that. But I think D is fine. I think this is a little too conservative. So, yeah, and it's really neat to have the horns play this low part right in here. Now, the only question is like, do you have a really good third and fourth, right? And this is actually exactly the way to do it. Like to have the first accompanied by the second. This is not a very high note, right? So the second supporting the first in a situation like this is better than the third supporting the first. Of course, you could always make this a second horn part as well, and then have that be the third, and that would not be a big problem. I'm just about to release a tip about horn rolls, which I've already done. The horn section rolls, but I just feel that there's another way of putting it in context, which will help people to approach the topic better. But either way would work in this situation, fine. And yeah, so like the rolls right in here are nice and clearly defined. Yeah, and I like these little bits of sound right in here. The support in the winds. It's all just so nicely done, right? And then adding more weight to the line in your Divisi cellos with a horn, that's really really nice. Okay. So I don't really have a problem with it. There's one tiny criterion which you know is more of a taste kind of a thing, keeping the textural colors fresh and not too much the same. Well, you have basically chosen your approach, and that is what you are going to do for the rest of the screen. However, as I just said, adding the cellos to this line, that that works. I see here you say arco natural, and I'm just like wondering. I see. So it's because you had this. You had this harmonic right in here. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all good. So let's jump to the next screen. I have not failed to see the timpani strokes right in here, and yeah, I would actually score these an octave lower. I think that they would be just a much better blend, right? And then these ones on G are fine where they are, and then this higher one is good. So I would just make these an octave lower. So now we get into the infamous section C, and yeah, so convincing allargando expansion, smooth release into bar 49. And I feel that you do that here as well. Like you're hanging, a lot of your instruments are hanging on to their pitches as they go forwards, just as you would hear from a piano player holding down the pedal, right? Now here you do not need to do this. You don't need to tell the players which bowing to use here. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, they will do the right thing here. Now, the thing about it is that you have a bit of a mixture of dynamics here, and it's not quite clear, like what dynamic everybody is in this bar, right? So you've got some piano crescendo to, mezzo forte, crescendo to forte, but then forte. See, like I think you're wanting to get that sort of a forte piano feeling that like. But I think that that's only necessary on the downbeat, right? And then here like diminuendo to what, right? The Sibelius playback system is going to have you diminuendo to like mezzo forte and then back, right? Is the music at mezzo forte here yet? What is going on with the other parts, right? What dynamic is this? So I think that just needs to be way clearer. And if you really want this harp to make any difference whatsoever, right, against this growing texture, it has to be marked way louder. Here you're saying piano crescendo, then you end up on this forte. This probably will not be heard, right? And then by the time you might be able to hear a little bit of the harp right in here, but by the time you get into this area, it will be overwhelmed by everything else. So maybe just a glissando kind of a passage is better. So yeah, but you've already got those kinds of elements sort of ripping into the downbeat anyway. So yeah, so you might need to rethink the harp, its role here. Maybe a big, huge rolled chord right on this would be something that would come through, because you're only going up to mezzo forte in your brass and your winds, and forte in your strings, and you've got this forte melody in the clarinets. So I would say a fortissimo roll on the harp. You would hear, just like big, a big roll, and you could say luxuriante or something, or just to so they can see that it's just supposed to be kind of an enormous big roll that is not necessarily kind of quick, and it's not a It's more of an arpeggio or an arpeggiation than it is a proper chord. All right, so this is really nicely divided up. You just have to ask yourself, do you want that much brass in this, right? Do you want a sound that stays in the background more? Because like the way that you've scored this, the first and second horn are going to are just totally going to overwhelm what's going on in the strings. These here you have sul ponticello, tremolo in your violins at pianissimo, and you have the horns here at piano, right? So the horns, even though they actually are sounding down there in that octave, those low A's and so on, they're the weight of their resonance is going to overwhelm both the tremolo violins and the harp as well, right? So is the horn the proper vehicle for this? So that's just something that you have to answer for yourself. Would it be better to use, like, say, a combination of English horn and bassoon? Would it be better to bring out, like, to change this to piano and change the horns to pianissimo? There's just something has to change about this balance. Okay, now you're saying very expressive, but then you don't give us any nuances, right? So what are the nuances? Ba-da-da-da-dum. Right? Shouldn't we go crescendo and then pull back? You just sing it, right? Sing it and then put in the hairpins that come out in your voice. Right? I would just think that right here it would be crescendo and then diminuendo at the end, right? So just work it out. If you're going to tell your player that you're going to be playing in a singing style and very expressive, then you better write in give them more guidance. I like the slurs; those are nice. You kind of have the sort of the two slurs right in here that are in the piano part. You can't have them both, right? You have to get rid of one. I would say get rid of this one. Okay, but I mean, otherwise, it sort of works, right? I think that it's put together pretty well. I like the idea of the harp in here. It really would be the harp that I would think that would be doing like a lot of this octave work. It's doodle 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 doodle, like the more figuration rather than just the eighth notes, but also adding the sixteenths and so on. Okay, and then right in here, I think that this is cool. This could be maybe this could be written out as a glissando partially. Yeah. Maybe there's a way of moving off the rests. All right, and then you have the trade-off to flute. There's actually something that I did. I think I used flute for the answering phrase. Yep. And what I would say is, like, in this case, like you sort of move the rolls around a little bit in your string section and in your brass section, but the treatment is very much the same as before, right? So, is there a way of adding some variance between the two, right? And then I think that you probably could hear from the mock-up that the sound of the muted trumpet was really coming through pretty, just really kind of starting to wear at the ear. Part of that is because you're importing the accents from the piano score, right? So not everything should have the same, like the, maybe it's the harp part that should have the accents and not the supporting brass, right? Okay, so let's talk about the criteria again. So careful treatment of the melodic voice to make it feel authentic to the composer's style. I think that I mean, I could imagine Falla doing things like this. That seems not unlikely. Keeping the accompaniment pattern from becoming too regular and therefore too predictable. I'd say that's something that you might need to work on. Like when I was dealing with the same problem in my score, I moved around the octaves from time to time of like where the harp was and other instruments, right? And you're doing a little bit of that. But like maybe that's something, I mean, you're throwing in a few little touches here. Maybe there's something that you could do to add a little bit of variety, right? So now let's take a look at the next screen to ascertain the next criterion, which is managing a sense of restraint, leading to a burst of energy. So that takes us to the last screen for this evaluation. You went ahead and scored way more, and that's great. But I can only go up to here for this particular level, but it's still great. There's just so much to talk about. So, like every score, I think over how orchestration works, and I find new things and new answers to questions that I hadn't thought of yet, and so on. So it's just like it's really works for me too. Okay, so we're going into that section, the all right, yeah. So there isn't a lot of restraint in here. I mean, you've got the dolce there, right? And this is kind of an interpretation of the piano part, right? That the pianist just sort of really kind of backing off, and then just adding this big burst of energy, right? So what I would say is that you are setting up the burst of energy and doing it pretty well, I would say, but I feel that there is a kind of a gap between here and there, right? It's I don't know if it follows through well enough. Like, with I'm not saying that you should keep the horns in there, but maybe there needs to be some way of getting to this point that involves the brass rather than just hitting on the downbeat there. And you really push your bassoon way up high here. And I mean, that's totally a playable note, but I mean, is it all that, it's going to be a very exposed note, and it'll just kind of tend to kind of sound like a little bit more like a chicken kind of going burk. You know what I mean? It's like I don't know if it will have the same kind of edge and power that, like, say, like giving it to the clarinet would have, right? All right, so the octaves in there, the okay, yeah, nicely set up. Yeah, so oboe and English horn, doubling the octaves with the violins, flute on top, and then you're adding yet another layer with the piccolo. So I'm wondering if that's a bit much, right? Because what's happening here at the rubato is that you are setting up like you were setting up. It's like the next criteria, the next criterion. It says conveying a sense of drama and soloing of melody, right? So is it setting things up for that kind of sense of drawing back, if by adding the piccolo on top, right? So just that's something that I think you should ask yourself. So just there's just so much power right at the beginning here, right? And then ya bum bum bum. That's nicely done too. Piccolo, oboe plus violas and first violins. Yeah. And that's all nice right in there. I don't know if you really need to do divisi on these, right? I mean, I mean, you're just kind of going over similar pitches. There's nothing about this that really requires to be being divided. All right. And horn, I think that's nice. Bum, 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 bum. I noticed you kind of changed the timing on some of these, like not the timing, but you changed the sense of push and pull a little bit in the hidden. Yeah, I'm not seeing the. I'm not seeing the. Yeah, so just in the mock-up, I just noticed that the timing was shifted around a little bit right in there. Yeah. All right, and then yeah. So once again, like if you're going to go push with the trombones right in here, then the harp just has no chance, right? So just figure out a different way of expressing this if you need to express it. Yeah, so like right in here, there's more of a chance, but like those low harp notes, like the lower you get with harp, it's very similar to like playing horn. The lower you get with harp, the more the dynamic power, the more the projection drops off. Right? So if you really, it seems to me that the harp is sort of the linchpin here. The way that this is scored really is the music is really dependent on it, but at the same time you've got horns and bassoons, you've got brass, trombones. So the harp just really doesn't have any chance in there to express it. So you have to come up with some other way of interpreting this if you need the brass in there. I really love the color that you've got in here with the bassoons and the horns and trombones, but it doesn't quite balance with the harp. Yeah, so I mean, such a nice score. I mean, a great way to start this group of entries, and I really do appreciate it. It's so fascinating to me to look through all these different scores. A bit overwhelming, I will admit, but it's still just it's a good test for me, and I really get to roll up my sleeves and turn on that part of me of direct one-on-one coaching and mentoring of orchestrators. So yeah, so right here G string. So that's also definitely okay. So Sol G. It's almost unnecessary to mark it, but it's all right to it is okay to mark it. But I would say Sol G. Yeah, see, so I can't turn off that part once it gets going. So really great entry. I really appreciate that you took the time to score this and send it to me, and I also appreciate so much your support on Patreon. It really means a lot. I mean, it's making this possible for not just the Patreon subscribers, but also for for a lot of people who are just subscribing to the website newsletter and who are following the YouTube channel and possibly part of the Facebook group. It's all of this big community out there of people who are learning and getting better. And anything that I have to offer you guys, any part of what I'm doing that helps you, I really feel honored by that. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Gerrit, and thank you everybody out there. And now I'm going to get a drink of water, and I'm just going to jump into the next evaluation. So that video should be coming up very, very soon for everybody. Thanks all. See you soon.